A little bit more about myself. I spent 30 years in the corporate world in communication systems. I have a bachelor's and a master's degree from Rice University in electrical engineering, focusing on communication systems. And I bring that up because we're going to be talking about surveys and statistics tonight. And so, well, this guy's not a sociologist. He's not, Well, of course, us engineers from Rice, we're a little bit biased. But communication systems theory is all about statistics. It's about trying to collect information out of a bunch of noise, and it's all statistical. And so I have a more than 30 year career background in statistics, and so that was one of the things that drew me. I've been at Probe now for 14 years, and one of my areas of focus, as Kirby mentioned, is looking at surveys and survey data and trying to understand what they're telling us. And so we want to talk about tonight in the context of fake news, which I know you haven't heard of fake news, but it's a big issue. And so you'll learn something new today. So we set it out and said, okay, the title of the talk is, Are Surveys Fake News? And so I'm going to tell you that no, surveys themselves are not fake news. If they're reliable, credible surveys, they're just data. So I hope you enjoyed the talk and dessert. But what I really want to talk about is, are surveys enabling fake news? And you're going to see as we go through there that they enable fake news in a way that you may not be aware of. And so we'll get into that. But first, let's define what we're talking about. So starting with fake news. We've heard about it, read about it, talked about it. You hear it all the time. Everybody uses it. How do you define it? Well, here's one that's a pretty good definition from PolitiFact. Fake news is made up stuff, masterfully manipulated to look like credible journalistic reports that are easily spread online to large audiences willing to believe the fictions and spread the word. And that hits a lot of the points. I have a slightly different definition for our talk tonight, that fake news is modified reality. Most fake news has some reality in it. It's based on something real, created intentionally or not. There's a lot of fake news that's just people messing up. To capture your attention, encouraging you to ingest and spread this modified reality to others. Effective fake news is hard to distinguish from the real truth. If you look at the articles in the checkout line, of course, they probably don't have them as many as they used to, but used to you go through the checkout line, you could read about the Martians landing in Roswell and the six-headed baby in Indonesia and all that. You say, well, I think that's probably a little stretching, it might be a little fake, but the fake news that we're talking about seems real, at least to a large segment of the population. Or as Garfield puts it for us, I admire people with integrity. And Garfield says, integrity? I have lots of integrity. Really? Yeah, I stole it off a guy. So that's kind of how some of this fake news works, right? Yeah. Why is it important? Well, probably think it's important already, but let's kind of put it in a Christian context. Satan is ultimately the father of all lies. Jesus said that there's no truth in him. Whenever he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own nature, for he is a liar and the father of lies. Lies, distortions of the truth, they ultimately find their source in Satan, because he is attempting to distort this world to obscure the truth of God and Jesus Christ. Partaking of and distributing falsehoods is not of God. Big surprise, right? Jesus also said, for this I have been born, and for this reason I came into the world, to testify to the truth. testify to the truth. It says, those who follow me, they know the truth that I share. And that's what Pilate says. What is truth? Jesus said, I am the truth. And so when we're involved in ingesting and spreading lies, we know that the Holy Spirit is not leading us to do that. We're being deceived. And we're being deceived for a bigger purpose than even the people who put out those lies had in mind. But, you know, as we look back over history, we have reached, in the last few years, you know, a level of ability to spread news that has never been seen in the world. In our teenage years, in our young adult years, for those of us that are my age, which is most of us here, you know, we had some ability. But today, we have ready access to this flood of news. We can easily distribute it we can easily contribute to spreading it. We have a dangerous ability to do that. And so we as Christians are called to recognize and expose lies. Primarily by lifting up Jesus Christ, who's the truth. But, as if you've been around Pro for a while, you know one of our key verses. See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, by empty lies, according to human tradition, according to the elementary spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. We're to be captive to Christ. And Paul was writing this instruction to Christians. He made that very clear in the opening part of his letter. He's not saying, you non-Christians, make sure you don't get taken captive. You Christians, make sure you're not taken captive by empty deceit, according to the human tradition, according to the elementary principles of the world, elementary spirits of the world. How long has this been happening? I mean, you know, we say it's happening at a greater level, but somebody wrote, I think those are very wrong who say that schoolboys should be encouraged to read newspapers. Nearly all that a boy reads there in his teens will be known before he is 20 to have been false in emphasis and interpretation, if not in fact as well, and most of it will have lost all importance. Most of what he remembers he will therefore have to unlearn. You know who said this? C.S. Lewis. In his book, Surprised by Joy, which was written in 1956, but he's referring to his teenage years in the 1910s. So he was warning us as Christians, watch out for the fake news. And since he was on the radio and, you know, doing news stuff, but maybe it's been longer. You know, somebody said there are laws to protect the freedom of the press's speech, but none that are worth anything to protect people from the press.
Right.
And that was Mark Twain. So it's been going on since well before Mark Twain, but we are dealing with a whole new dimension with the abilities that we have today. And just as an example of fake news, just thought I'd point this out. There's on the Dallas Morning News, February 21st, 2019, just a few weeks ago, there was an article about the Southern Poverty Law Center. And then they said the Southern Poverty Law Center defines a hate group as an organization that attacks or maligns an entire class of people. It denied its list unfairly targets conservative groups. For example, defaming any gay men as being child molesters or pedophiles, the kind of speech we call out as defamatory. It's negative propaganda. And here we see, Pro Ministries is a hate group. And there's the chief hater.
Right here.
And so if you wanted to defile and use defamatory speech, she's the person to do it. As you know, if you follow Probe, I mean, everything that she writes and communicates is steeped in the love of Jesus Christ and is not defamatory or defaming of the people. Is it an issue? Well, obviously it is, but this is some data from Pew Research Group The majority of people say fake news has left Americans confused about basic facts. And so you can see there's 64% with a great deal of confusion, 24% with some, so that makes 88% of Americans say they're somewhat or a lot confused because of fake news. And most Americans overestimate, in my opinion, in fact, their truth radar. Because most see fake news is causing a great deal of confusion, but most are confident in their own ability to identify when a news story is made up. You know, other people are really being messed up by this, but not me, I'm too smart. And so you can see that 39% are very confident and 45% are somewhat confident, adding up to 84%. Now, we're going to talk more about this later, but I'm going to tell you when it comes to surveys and statistics, most are not able to distinguish the fake news from real news, including the authors, and we'll get into that. So how do we detect fake news? 3 things I want us to think about. Just one is you consider the source. How many times has it cried wolf before? Does it have a slanted agenda? And so in certain sources you say, oh, well, I know this would be fake news, I haven't even read it. You consider the perspective. Is it a news story that's promoting an opinion? Does it represent multiple sides, or is it all one side? And you consider the data. Does it seem possible what they're saying? Does it make sense with your experience? Is it from a credible source? Or does it appear slanted? As this lady said, I'm sorry, sir, without a receipt and the actual item, I can't give you a refund. Well, here it is, right here. It's my new clothes, got them right here. Well, how about surveys? How do they feed into this? Well, one view of it would be, and kind of the natural view would be, well, surveys, as we said earlier, they're just data. And they're taken, with a significant number of people, and the statistics, are good. And so we say, well, surveys are an attempt to remove the stigma of crying wolf. I throw in some survey data, and it's agendaless. It can't have a slanted agenda. It's just the facts. It's not promoting an opinion. And surveys take no side. They're trying to find out what the sides are, right? Usually. And does it seem possible? Of course, it's real data, so it must be possible. It's right there. Is it from a credible source? It's a reputable survey taker. It's a survey company that takes thousands of surveys. Does it appear slanted? Only if the data slants it, and then the data's the data. So that's kind of your first impression when you think about it. This should help. So surveys might be a sign that we don't have to be concerned when there's survey data included in the article. We can say, this has got to be true. They got survey data. Well, survey statistics are tricky. We expect, as I said just now, we expect surveys to give us new or better truths. Our intuition may be wrong, but surveys are real. We may think people are thinking this, but the survey says they're thinking that. And so I got to change my thinking to match the survey. And they're often providing insights that are surprising or counterintuitive. That's why we take them, right? So, as Joe Friday says, all we know are the facts, ma'am, just the facts. Therefore, authors look to data to strengthen or modify their position. And they can decide to intentionally misuse that data to support their position. Most often, they unintentionally misuse the data. And we're going to talk about that a fair amount here. This is kind of interesting. Let me read it. The remark attributed to Disraeli, the British Prime Minister, would often apply with justice and force. There are 3 kinds of lies. Lies, damn lies, and statistics. That's from Mark Twain's own autobiography. Mark Twain did not say that. He quoted Disraeli as saying that. No one has ever found any place where Disraeli said that, but he thought that he said that. And so that's, and still it's a great saying, right? As someone who deals with statistics, I concur 1,000%. There are lies, damn lies, in statistics. And trusted sources can misuse the data. And this is what makes statistical fake news or survey fake news different than normal fake news. Normal fake news, you can look at the source and you can say, I know that's going to be, I got to look out for a fake. Here, with statistical or survey data, it can be a very trusted source, and it can have incorrect conclusions. It can try to direct us into misguided actions because of those conclusions. A trusted source does not equal trustworthy survey results or survey interpretation. Because once again, it's not really the survey's fault most of the time. It's the misunderstanding of how to read a survey. So it's different because it gives credence to a news report by moving from an opinion to a position supported by data. But as it crosses over into fake news, you cherry pick the results, you misrepresent the primary results, you misunderstand the primary results. And it's often done unintentionally. As we see in this cartoon, Dilbert says, I didn't have any accurate numbers, so I just made this one up. 4 million and something. Studies have shown that accurate numbers aren't any more useful than the ones you make up. Someone asked, how many studies showed that? 87. Yeah. Once you start down that path, it's easy just to keep on going. 87, I'm sure of it. People we trust sometimes convert survey results into fake news. Not intentionally. People we trust frequently convert survey results into fake news because surveys are hard to deal with correctly. So I list a bunch of problems here. We're going to cover these, so I'm not going to talk too much about them because we're going to cover them as we go through. But there's a whole bunch of problems or things you have to deal with. The top one is misrepresenting the overall purpose and results of a survey. And we'll see a couple examples of that. Another one that's really a big deal is using independent results as if they were and I'll explain that when we get into it. And touting large percentage differences in small numbers. I'm going to give you a quick example of that. Let's see, where did I bring that in here? I put it somewhere. It doesn't matter, I know the numbers. In today's Dallas Morning News, there's a report about the incidence of elderly people over the age of 65, I don't know if there's anybody here over 65, who get injured while walking their dog. And for some reason, which I think there's got to be an explanation for, but I haven't found it yet. From 2004 to 2017, it went up from 1,600 in a year to 4,300 in a year. And that's a large increase, okay? And so it went up 160 some odd percent. I mean, it's terrible. I mean, you'd be a fool to walk your dog. Don't do it. I mean, it's climbing. Well, if you look at the number of Americans over the age of 65 and the number of dogs that are owned by Americans over the age of 65, and you kind of do some numbers on there, you come out, and this is not going to be exact, but it's close enough, that in 2004, the probability of you being a senior citizen, walking your dog and getting injured while walking your dog, of not doing that, but you have a dog and you take it out, is 99.99%. 99.99%. Nothing's going to happen to you. In 2017, it's terrible. It's now 99.98. I would just stay in my house and not go outside. This is a very frequent thing that's done. Is you say, oh, it's gone up by 168%. Yes, but the number was so small in the first place that it's still a very, very small number. Turn it around and look at it. And so I love this cartoon. And if you read it there, it says it's an app, the Tornado Guard. Plays a loud alert sound when there's a tornado warning for your area. And it's rated 4 out of 5 stars. Here are the ratings. First one, good user interface, many alert choices. Next one, running great, no crashes. Next one, 5 stars. I like how you can set multiple locations. The fourth one, 1 star. App did not warn me about tornado. The problem with averaging star ratings. So if you see something that's rated 4 out of 5 stars, you might want to look at the 1 stars and see what really bad happened, right? Because that's the the other 3 don't say anything about how it works. But the 1 rating of how it works is not positive. Kirby's mentioned that you have a copy of Cultural Captives. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Cultural Captives other than this chart to tell you. Cultural Captives is looking at the beliefs and behavior of American young adults. And it's looking at surveys to get that data. And there's several chapters that talk about some of these issues and some examples of people that have these issues, such as Bradley Wright and Christians Are Hateful Hypocrites and Other Lies You've Been Told, Rodney Stark and What Americans Really Believe. These are both PhD sociologists working at universities in the United States. Both of them are Christians. And they claim, and particularly Bradley Wright, that Barna is an extremist. When, as you'll see in Cultural Captives, I explain how the surveys that they use to write their articles and books say exactly the same as the Barna survey when you ask those surveys the same questions that Barna asked in his survey. They just didn't ask the question. They didn't, you would think if you saw, okay, this guy asked these questions and he's saying this, I can use these surveys and ask the same question. And you can, I've done it, as in you can read it about in the book. And they came out almost identical. And so they were using surveys that support the person they said is, wild-eyed extremist. They show the importance of asking the and questions, because that's what Barna does. They look at, well, how many people believe in God and believe that Jesus lived a sinless life and believe the Bible is the inerrant word of God? As opposed to, well, I know there's many people believe in God, I know there's many people believe in Jesus, I know there's many people believe in the Bible, so they all must be the same, so whatever one statistic is, that's it. Well, it turns out people are not that simple. And Barna asked the and question and uncovered it. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to look at 4 examples and just kind of see how you can misuse the data to help equip you and help you in thinking as you look at data. And I'll get that again. So one's called Dissing Darwin, and so we'll start there and then we'll get to the other ones. So Dissing Darwin, it's fairly old, it's April 2005. It's an article by Michael Ennis in Texas Monthly. And it's an opinion piece, so it's not like he was reporting the news, but he does what many other people do. He wants to use statistics to prove his point. And he had a really wild point. Sitting here today in 2019, we'll think it's pretty humorous to start out with. So Dissing Darwin, as Texas grapples with the future of biotech, our long-standing hostility toward one of modern science's founding fathers is about to cost us plenty. And you know how much Texas has suffered over that since 2005. I mean, our economy is in the tank. But set that aside. It doesn't matter. We've got the data here to show his point. And so his point is Texas is on the verge of economic ruin. And the reason for that so as a result of that, we need to kick out intelligent design discussion out of all of our education and focus strictly on naturalistic evolution, and that will fix that problem. And that's really the theme of his article. And so you can see I've got purple over here as the conclusion, yellow the cause, and the gold is evidence that he presents. And so he says, the reason for the economic ruin is we're going to miss out on the biotech gold rush. And the evidence for that is Austin ranks 12th behind San Diego, Boston, Raleigh, Durham in the level of biotech funding for public companies. So clearly we're missing out. And the reason for that, the cause is there's no funding for embryonic stem cell research. That's really hurt it. And we have a life sciences illiterate populace. It's terrible. I'd hate to test you folks and see how illiterate you were. And we know that because Texas students score below the national average on science testing. So we got proof, we got good strong data. And the reason for that is because teachers can't adequately teach evolution, which, as you know, is not a big part of this standardized science test. And that's causing us to do poorly. And we know this because Texas received a C on its evolution curriculum standards, and North Carolina and California received an A. And they're ahead of us in biotech funding. Because there's a strong correlation with the overall effectiveness in teaching science. So that's his argument. It's all based on data. We have no, I mean, we just got to accept it. And we got to go out and tell people that our economy is doing lousy. You need to start telling people because they think it's doing really well, and you got to tell them, no, you're just confused. So let's ask some questions. Will biotech have a big economic impact? Why do San Diego, Boston, and Raleigh, Durham rank highly in the level of funding? Is there a relationship between science scores and biotech funding? Did Texas students do worse than California and North Carolina? Is there a correlation between the evolution curriculum standards and general science achievement? So let's start with the last one and go build up from there. Is there a correlation between evolution curriculum standards and general science achievement? And those standards come from a study done by Fordham Foundation, and then the science achievement comes from the National Assessment of Science Scores. It's taken every 4 years. And so here's the data. And so let's look at it. So here's the science scores rating from 1 to 10. And you can see North Carolina is 25th, Texas is 29th, and California, who has a lot of biotech stuff, is 37th, and there was only 37 entities surveyed, so they're dead last. But we know that, but over here, in the evaluation of their evolution standards, North Carolina and California got an A, and we got a C. But we need to, we need to be good statistical guys. And look at this chart. Oh, I see something. There's 4 in the top 10 that got Fs. And there's also 5 that got Bs. We'll ignore those because we're working with Michael Ennis here. And so clearly we can say that since the 2 worst performing states were rated an A and 4 would have got an F, it's obvious. If you want to improve science scores, revise your curriculum standards to receive an F in the Fordham evaluation. I don't know why he didn't get that. It's right there. Just look at the data. It certainly doesn't support his point. Is there a relationship between science scores and biotech funding? So we'll look at a couple of surveys on that, the ones he used. So here's the biotech funding ranking. Here's the science scores ranking. And we see, well, Boston seems to work, but whoa, 37, 37, 25, 23, 37. There's only one conclusion you can draw from that. If you want to build a biotech industry, lower your science education so that your students score poorly on the national test. Because everyone, except for Boston, who has a lot of biotech funding, does really poor. And I don't know where he got his data, but do Texas students do worse than other students? So we look at the national education statistics, and you look at the total, and Texas is below average. It's 144, and the national 155. Here we're kind of tied, and everywhere else we're above or tied with the average. And so, and you notice that California is way worse than we are when this was done. and probably even worse now, but why? So the obvious conclusion, if you want to learn science, move to a state with no major industry or metropolitan area. So you can see when we look at the way this survey data, or this data was used to promote his position, a better, more likely result is that, revise your standards to receive an F for teaching of evolution, make sure your students score poorly, and move to a state with no major industry or metropolitan areas. Now clearly, that doesn't make any sense. But it makes much more sense than what he tried to derive from those same surveys, because they don't support his conclusions at all. So he's intentionally using fake news to rally us to create the society that he wants. And it's not bad. So in some sense, you're allowed to do that, but I say you can't misuse statistics to support your argument. So to think about that, here's another little Dilbert. His boss says, from now on, salaries will be based on your predicted success, not your past performance. We ran a computer model against your education and DNA information, and we predict you'll die in a state or mishap within a week. What if I disagree with this prediction? Write up your opinion and staple it to your analysis. That's kind of how he was thinking. And so there's three areas that he applied the results of the wrong group out of context. He mixed statistics from different areas as if they were related. And he misrepresented the overall purpose and results of the research for his own purpose. Okay, so let's go to somebody that's not quite so fake news, intense. This is a study from University of Washington. It's on HPV protection and the use of condoms. And so they performed research, they tracked the sexual activity of 82 co-eds. So right away it's not a statistically significant group, but it's enough to learn something, but you realize it's a pretty small group. And so they reported their results in the England Journal of Medicine. And just like today with the thing about the dog walking, that's reported in the Journal of American Medicine, Journal of American Medical Association Surgery Journal. This was in the New England Journal of Medicine. And then the news pick it up, right? And so there's some of the headlines. And I'm going to jump down. There's the Dallas Morning News. Condoms reduce risk of cervical cancer, survey says. Which is not too bad. But here's the AP. Condoms proven to protect against virus. For the first time, scientists have proof that condoms offer women impressive protection against the virus that causes cervical cancer. Whew. Boy, that is a relief. That's good to know. So we want to ask you questions. What is meant by proven? How did scientists obtain the proof? What is the definition of impressive protection? Well, how did they obtain the proof? Well, the study was structured to provide better information they had in the past on the impact of male condom use on the likelihood of women contracting HPV by monitoring the sexual activity. So they reported every week on their sexual activity and their health of 82 college women who began. It actually started with like 160, but they they eliminated those that already were sexually active, and then those that didn't get sexually active in college, and so they were left with these 82. And they found women whose partners used condoms for all instances of intercourse during the previous 8 months were 70% less likely to acquire a new infection than were women whose partners used condoms less than 5% of the time. Wow. That's an impressive reduction. 70% less likely. So what is the definition of impressive protection? Because that was an impressive reduction. But what's impressive protection? Well, according to the study results, sexually active college women whose male partners use condoms 100% of the time with all sexual partners have roughly a 38% chance of contracting HPV within the first year of becoming sexually active. If your partner uses a condom like 5% of the time, then you're 68% or 70% more than that, which puts you about 60 some odd percent. So it's an improvement. But let's think about what we're really interested in. Let's say that your daughter goes to college and she's there for 5 years and is sexually active and has the same behavior all 5 years, which is, it's an assumption, but then the probability of having HPV after 5 years of college, we'll go through the math, is 91%. So condoms have impressive protection that if you have a partner that uses them 100% of the time, not just with you, but with everybody, you have a 9% chance of not having HPV at the end of college. That's impressive. That I have 3 daughters, and I decided abstinence was a much more impressive statistic than that. The headlines should really read, "Condoms not effective in preventing HPV for sexually active adults." But that's not what the university study pointed out. That's not what the headlines said. And so people are going around saying, "Hey, wow, this is great." Of course, most of them are thinking, how am I going to get somebody to use condoms 100% of the time that's going around having sex with people in college? But that's another problem. And so this is some of the things they did. And so they call bad results good because they are better than for another group, but they're really bad, and they neglect to consider a meaningful time period. If you make your time period short enough, you can change your time period, you can make statistics say anything you want.
Yeah.
Okay, so now here's where the meat of the talk is tonight. On U.S. Christianity growing stronger. So in November 2017, Landon Schnabel of Indiana University, Bloomingdale, and Sean Bach of Harvard released a report. It was called Persistent and Exceptional Intensity of American Religion. It was based primarily on general social survey results from 1989 to 2018. Now, if you're familiar with my book, Cultural Captives, you know that's one of the surveys that I analyzed. So I got in and actually used the raw data. These guys didn't do that, they just looked at the data. But they found something that was interesting. And they concluded that intense religion in the United States is persistent and exceptional in ways that do not fit the secularization thesis. Secularization thesis says, in Europe, Christianity has continued to go down and down and down in its influence on society. And so we don't really see that amongst the intense religious in the United States. There is not a decline in those who attend more than weekly. Therefore, clergy are increasingly preaching to the choir. The church is not growing, it's not impacting people, but the people in the choir are still in the choir. And we'll talk about how many people that is in just a minute. So, I say it's a different type of secularization. It's perhaps the polarization of religion, where you have the very faithful and then everyone else is fleeing. So then, so a minority of ultra-committed Christians is staying the course, while less committed Christians are falling away. And I suspect most of you can say, yeah, I kind of see that. Seems like. Well, in January 2018, a dedicated Christian, and I'm not mentioning his name or their names because it's not them, okay? It's just the difficulty of using it. With impeccable ministry credentials, published an article. Its title was, "New Harvard Research Says U.S. Christianity is not shrinking, but growing stronger." Wow, that's exciting. And they lead off with the Schnabel-Bach report as the primary evidence, hence the new Harvard research. Now, I'll point out to you that Schnabel and Bach, Schnabel begins with an S, Bach begins with a B. Schnabel is the first author listed. Schnabel is from Indiana University, Bloomington, not Harvard. And yet, this Christian article says, new Harvard research says U.S. Christianity is not shrinking but growing stronger. And it also references some other surveys, Pew surveys, Christian Smith and Rodney Stark, which if you read Cultural Cabinet or have read it, you'll know I talk about them quite a bit as providing good data and bad data. Christian Smith provides a lot of good data on the surveys he's done. Well, our author, who will remain unnamed, concluded, and this is a quote, "Is church-going and religious adherence really in widespread decline? Absolutely not. Well, mainline churches are tanking, but their members are simply going elsewhere. They're all showing up in evangelical churches." You probably noticed there's a huge influx of mainline people coming to church. And evangelical churches are holding strong according to the research. That would be good news. So the headline says Christianity is not shrinking but growing stronger. Schnabel and Bach say, "We're convinced by the steep downward trend in average religiousness. Clearly, America appears to be secularizing, just in a different way than Europe." They didn't say it was not shrinking, and they certainly didn't say it was growing stronger. Now, there's one thing that they said that could have been interpreted that way if you weren't reading carefully. What does the GSS data tell us, since they use the GSS survey? All Protestants are reduced from 62% in 1976 down to 47% of the population. That's a significant reduction. Evangelicals have reduced from 33% of the population down to 28%, and millennial evangelicals have reduced from 31% down to 23% of the population. We're not shrinking. Christianity is not shrinking. We're growing stronger. And it's true that the core may remain strong, but basically he's at the very beginning, he's misrepresenting overall purpose and results of the research that he's trying to report on for us. Independent versus and, something I mentioned before. His article states the percentage who attend church more than once a week, pray daily, and accept the Bible as wholly reliable and deeply instructive to their lives has remained absolutely still bar constant for the last 50 years. The percentage is also not small. The items in blue are areas where he's misstating the very data that the survey is talking about. That's not the biggest problem here, but it's certainly part of the problem. It's just being sloppy, not making sure that what you're saying is actually what the survey is talking about. Schnabel and Bach's report says, those that pray multiple times a day, not daily, multiple times per day, amongst all Americans is 30%, but evangelicals who pray multiple times a day are 13% of all Americans. Those who attend church more than once a week, 8%, 4%. Believe the Bible is to be taken literally, 32% of all, 16% are evangelicals who believe that. So, that's could be worse, although that number seems to be pretty low. But the article says and the Schnabel report are independent. These are independent numbers. It's not the people that do this and this and this, but the article says and. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I have the survey data. I've done this analysis already. I can do the and so we calculate the numbers. And those who pray more than daily and do church more than weekly and believe Bible is literal word of God is 3.5% of all Americans. 2.6% are evangelicals. I don't know. I think 3.5% is small by any measure. Now, when Kirby and I shared this with the author, he kind of, I'm sure your data is right, but I never said how big it was, and so 3.5%, at least that's consistent. Yeah, it's consistent. The fact this number has remained relatively constant over 50 years is a source of regret, not something to brag about. We are evangelicals. Evangelicals are supposed to be sharing the gospel, growing the church, and we're not responsible for the results, but that's what we want to see happen. And so to be at 3.5% of Americans is not a happy picture. He says that attending service more than once a week continues to be twice as high among Americans compared to the next highest attending industrial country. And that is true. I mean, the article never tells us the percentages, but Schnabel and Bach do tell us what they are. And the percentage attending church more than once a week in 2014, 6.9% of Americans, 2.2% of the Irish. Hey, we're three times, woohoo! Yeah. But the percentage not attending church more than once a week is 93% of Americans and 97.8% of the Irish, which is basically the same. They're both over 90%. That's not something to cheer about. He's calling bad results good because they're better than another group, and he's touting large percentage differences in small numbers, which typically mean nothing. Okay. This is just when you're dealing with survey data. Now he's gone to a Pew report, and he writes, it's a fact. Evangelical churches gain 5 new congregants exiled from the liberal churches for every one they lose for any reason. This comes from a Pew report, the title of which is Christians Decline Sharply as Share of Population. You notice the stark contrast between the title of the report that he's using and the title of the article that he has that says Christians are growing? The Pew report actually says, I brought that with me, I don't know where I put it. Non-denominational Protestantism gains roughly 5 adherents through religious switching for every adherent it loses. And it's not talking about in general, it's talking about from childhood to adulthood. So people that change once they're adults, this is not talking about that, which you get the impression from the top item that it's all situations. It's just from childhood to adulthood. It's non-denominational Protestantism. Well, what's the issue with that? Well, the Pew survey reports that evangelicals, on the other hand, gained about 1.2 for every one lost, not 5 to 1. It's a minor difference. And evangelicals are still losing on a percentage basis. And you ask me why if you don't know why. If you gain 1.2 for everyone you lose, just think about it. If you got 1,000 evangelicals and you lose 10 and you gain 12, and the population is growing and people are changing as adults, that 2 people that you gained doesn't make much difference, right? And you lose it in population growth and changes later. That's the answer. How do these statements jive? Non-denominational evangelicals, which is not all non-denominational in the report, are a small percentage of evangelicals. So, and most of the ones that changed from childhood to non-denominational, guess what? They were already an evangelical church, and they changed to a non-denominational church. And so that doesn't affect the big number, it just affects the inside. And so when you change the title and say all evangelicals, you've gone way, way off base. And so in fact, when we look at the growth, we see that in that survey, overall evangelicals are down 0.9% from 2007 to 2014. Non-denominationals are up 3.4% from 3.4 to 4.9. But most of those changes were already evangelical, so it didn't help the evangelical number at all, which is the bigger number that mattered. So I got to speed up here to finish this off. So he also decides to make up some numbers, which is a shame, but he did. And these are 2 examples where he just picked made up numbers because he didn't have any numbers to draw on. And I explained that in this. And this will be available in the survey. And then he draws upon Rodney Stark, who says, the younger they are, the less likely they are to attend church. But the concern is a false alarm. The same effect can be found in every national survey of church attendance ever done. Well, I don't think they had surveys from the year 30 AD to today. But even over, the last 60 years in America, that's kind of true, except it's not, because you look at the number of nuns, they grow across the board from all ages as you go forward in time. But just to see what's happening today, because this is, I think, important to understand. The people who were 18 to 27 in 2007, who are 25 to 34 in 2014, okay, they had aged. And Pew did a massive survey, 35,000 people they surveyed in 2007, 2014. In 2007, 26% of them were atheist, agnostic, or nothing at all. In 2014, 34% of them. So I jumped up a year from 23 to 32 versus moving to 30 to 39. Because when you're 30 to 39, you start to have kids. And the Stark's point was, when you start having kids, you come back to church and all that. Whoops, it grew from 23% to 27%. There is something new going on today that hasn't been going on in the past. America has reached a point where the non-Christian mindset is the norm. You don't have to worry about teaching your children Christian things so that they can fit in with their society. That's not a concern, and the data, points it out. So pointing back to prior things is a dangerous thing to do. And so we didn't talk about all these, but you can see somebody that's a really fine Christian, and I mean that, a really fine Christian, they looked at this survey report and they said, wow, this seems good. I need to write about this. And I'll pull in some of these other surveys, and boy, this is going to encourage people. They're going to say, hey, things are actually looking up. And just destroyed is no credibility. And he has personal credibility, believe me. But in his analysis, he just didn't take it seriously. He didn't realize how dangerous it is to mess with statistics. So very quickly, guess what? Our author's article was so encouraging that other Christian commentators could not resist the opportunity to summarize it. And so one particular one who you would know very well wrote an article, or somebody wrote it for him, and it says, Christianity gets a faith lift from Harvard. At Harvard, they are cheering for us Christians. They love us there at Harvard. The whole administration, they're just rallying around Christians. And he says, not so fast, says Harvard University. Their latest study shows that U.S. Christianity isn't only alive, but growing. So now, the guy from Indiana University is totally ignored. But not only that, the authors of Harvard's report, and it goes on, they took all the data from Pew, all the data from Stark, all the data from Christian Smith, and they said, Harvard said that. Which if I was Christian Smith and Stark and Pew, I'd be a little upset with that. Not to mention the poor author from Indiana University, who is apparently, has died or something. But I will tell you, that person is they are dead on, right up Christian. They are somebody I respect immensely. They believe that, they didn't appreciate the difficulty of dealing with survey and statistics correctly. So what are you going to do about it? Oh, great, you scared the life out of me. What can we do? When you see statistics in the report, realize that you have not seen the survey data itself. You're seeing somebody's interpretation. Right. So like Dilbert's boss says here, can I have a 25% raise to get my compensation up to market levels? No. Okay, I'll just work 25% less because you won't know the difference. I wouldn't know if we did that. Should I get back to separating the zeros from the ones in our database? So, you know, they don't know, and the readers don't know. So you need to assume that it's incomplete or unproven until proven otherwise. For usual sources of fake news, assume it's distorted. For trustworthy sources, realize it may be mishandled, maybe badly. Unless one of the following is true. The author is a reliable source who actually did the analysis. And that's why hopefully you can trust me most of the time. I do the analysis. You have reviewed the actual survey data in detail, or you've checked with a trusted source on statistical analysis. How can you share it with other people? Well, you need to check the source material for consistency with the article if possible. Look for the type of problems we've talked about. Look, have others written about the source material, not the article that you're questioning. Have others critically review the article, not just blindly quoting from the article and messing it up further, or ask an expert to analyze the article. So kind of the bottom line on all that is, for most of us, if you see a bunch of statistics and you say, wow, this is different than what I generally believe, what I generally see out there. If it's true, I'm excited. Or if it's true, I'm concerned. How do I know? We ask an expert. And since you're associated with Probe, send me an email, scable@probe.org, and I will try it, because I want to know, if you've seen that, and I'll do my best to get you that answer. Because surveys are a valuable tool. They can really enhance our understanding of a lot of areas, but they're misleading and not handled correctly. So don't help statistics legitimize fake news. Don't repeat them just because you ran across them. I ran across this survey that said, you're probably fake newsing it. It's like a power tool. Treat it with respect. It can cut your fingers off if you're not careful. It's like a virus. Try not to infect others with the virus that you're associated with. And then I have a sheet of resources that you can use in this area. I know this is a lot of stuff, but I wanted to kind of overwhelm you with the difficulty, and so that you appreciate that it's not normal fake news where you look at the author and say, oh, this guy's going to be fake news. You can look at authors and say, man, I love this guy. This guy is right on. This guy's biblically solid. It doesn't mean that the statistics are solid. And so you need to kind of check it. And it's like the case that we just talked about. You don't want to fall in the, besides this other article about everything being Harvard, there's a lot of blog posts out there that are spouting this news Harvard study that says Christianity is really growing and we're getting stronger, and there's never a survey, there's never a study that said that at all. Somebody thought it did, and then it just grew and grew. I imagine next year, evangelicals will sit back and say, hey, we got it made. We don't need to work so hard. We'll cut back on our evangelism budget because we're going stronger. We're doing well. Hopefully not, but it's the type of thing that happens. So we really appreciate you coming tonight, and I went a little long, but it's about 8. It's close to 8.
Any quick questions for Steve? Any quick questions, or everybody need to get going? Well, let me just mention that one of the things we're working on, Steve, you might talk about that for just a minute, is that we really want to do a survey of the next generation.
The last survey we did was 10 years ago, roughly. And so we got this whole new generation coming up, And the surveys that we do go a level below because we're evangelicals and we're interested. And so if you take this